Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Welcome to the final Pompey Politics podcast of our winter season 2024. It's, I don't know, can't remember how many sleeps it is till Santa, probably 7 or 8. So we are here tonight to have a look at the the full council meeting on Tuesday. And obviously the last one went all a touch EastEnders with "get out of my pub. Oh, I don't like what you're saying about me." So we're looking to see whether this one is going to be just as lively, Simon, or perhaps as we move towards the season of goodwill, perhaps calmer waters will return.
Well, who can tell with these things? I mean, if the number of motions and the number of questions from members is anything to go by, this might be a saner one, but without giving too much away. Of the things on the notice of motion, 4 of them are the same thing.
Well, and I guess, like with everything, isn't it? In your letter to Santa, every year there's the thing that everyone puts on their list, and it was Furby's one year. So we will find out what the must-have on for 2024 is on the list of our local councillors as we dive into the detail.
Yeah, indeed. With these motions, as I said in the episode title and lead in, it would be whether it's ho 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 or whether it's bar humbug. You'll forgive me for not having the forethought to put in those sound effects for us to declare them either ho 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 or bar humbug as we discuss them. Sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to be fair, I gave my first. I had my first job this week as Father Christmas for an upcoming children's party video message on the 23rd. So yeah, we will. I've been doing a bit of method acting, so we'll see how we go as we get into the detail.
Okay. Well, we'll bear with that. And as I always said, ho 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 is not a nice way to greet people. They get offended.
Use the American sex worker vernacular, but we wouldn't because it's a family show.
Yes, it's a family show. It's before the 9 o'clock watershed. I nearly said aftershed. It's before the aftershed. That didn't even make sense. And I'm only drinking tea again. So here we go. So shall we crack on and have a bit of a look and kind of and see what we've got. So our agenda for our full council, and for those of you following at home, those eagerly anticipating what's actually going on. If you didn't see the QR code at the beginning of the episode, that would enable you to scan and see a copy of the agenda, so you can do your homework where you've missed out. It's gone now. But no, seriously, here's the link. I'm just popping in if you want to go to the Portsmouth City Council's Democratic Services output for it, and you can watch along live. But for us, agenda. What is on our agenda? So as I said, usual sorts of things, but actually we've got something to talk about before we get to the notices of motion today, which is about the local council tax support scheme. Do you have anyone want to know what that is?
It is a tax support scheme. Oh,
so I think you might be getting excited about the word tax. But it's basically the scheme where some people are allowed to. So basically, they can get a discount, a dispensation off of actually their council tax payments, and that is, there's a revision kind of coming up about that scheme, and essentially. What this report does, there's a nice little report that kind of breaks it down, is that because at the moment there's basically kind of a straight cut off, and some of the legislation's changed, some of the funding's changed from central government, and basically this is recommending changes that come into effect on April 1st next year. And the local council tax support scheme was introduced in 2013. Council broadly adopted the previous measures that were on the previous scheme, the council tax benefit scheme, but due to central funding changes of councils, councils were then required to at least charge residents, no matter their circumstances, at least 20% of their council tax. And this report talks about an 8-week consultation of council taxpayers, preceptors, and debt advisors, had 280 responses, and in by and large, 2/3 of people were in favour of the changes that are proposed. I'm going to put up on screen for those of us watching in glorious Technicolor that they can see what the banding is proposed. But essentially, I'll bullet point what the issues are rather than kind of read through the banding, because I think that will be about as exciting as watching paint dry. But essentially, the aim is to make it an easier to understand and apply process, greater support for houses on lower incomes, so there'll actually be a 90% discount for those in most need, rather than just an 80% discount. It works better in concert with the universal credit system, supports families and applicants in receipt of disability benefit and those working with allowances for childcare costs, deals with the fact that those on universal credit, about 40% of universal credit, those in receipt of universal credit, occur about between 8 and 12 changes in their entitlement over the course of the year, and that would affect their council tax discount. And because this is now this proposal is that there are different bands that are either a 90% discount, a 65% discount, a 40% discount, or a 15% discount off of the council tax charges, and those vary depending on your weekly income and whether it's a single person, a couple, or someone, or a person or a couple supporting one or more than 2 children. And essentially, that's kind of what that's there, and reduces the kind of need for constant changes in awards. So therefore, should be easier to administer, which is something that sounds good.
Yeah, and I think, with all of these things, it is so difficult with any kind of benefit, and I think this is where this touches a throwback to one of the the probably big stories of the year, is that universal benefits are really easy to administer. The second you get into any kind of means tested benefit, it becomes incredibly difficult and complex. And there's that element, isn't there, where we talk about people in the most need or on the lowest income. And it all seems perfectly sensible. But then when you start bringing in variables of children and single versus double occupancy, and I think, both governments and councils have the devil's own job, and universal credit. And again, I've not personally, but I've through my work, I've been exposed to it a little bit. And I like to think I've got a decent grasp of numbers, and it is devilishly complicated. And it spits out a number at the end, and well, that's the number. And as somebody that sometimes likes to see how that's been worked out, completely impenetrable. So it sounds like by banding it, they're going to simplify it. And I guess it's well, we're all going to have to keep our fingers crossed that it does what it's intended to do.
Yeah, indeed. And one other thing worth mentioning is that these changes only affect those of working age. Those in receipt of council tax discounts that are pensioners aren't affected. They still get 100% a discount, because obviously changes to pensions or pension payments and benefits are a emotive subject at the minute.
Yeah, no, I think it's still running and running, that one. So yes, but we'll keep the focus local, because that's what we try and do on these shows. Whether the councillors have honoured us with the same level of focus on things which are local and are able to be changed, then I will bow to yourself to lead us into our first major topic.
Okay, so as I teased in the intro, the next thing to kind of talk about is that post office closures. Now, there are not one, not two, not three, but 4 motions on the order paper, basically on the agenda, to talk about with regard to post office closures. And I'm going to summarise them briefly because, funnily enough, they say a similar thing. So here we go.
And I guess before you jump in,
Before I launch into
sounds
it.
like before you launch into it, so there are more motions than there are proposed. Post office, I believe the phrase the post office used to using are consultations rather than closures, with
Yes.
closure being a potential outcome for our very own local one in Cosham High Street, and I believe the other one is in Slindon Street.
Yes.
So let's have and well done on this one, Simon, for mashing all four motions, and let's
Okay.
who gets to go first?
So they're on the agenda in the order with which they were submitted to they submitted in. Okay, so in that respect, you can get a gauge of who decided to put in their notice of motion first. So the first one, and this is actually item 10A, which is item 10 is the notice of motion, and A is the post office motion from councillors Lee Hunt and Richard Adair from of Lib Dem fame. But essentially, to give an overarching compression of what all of the points are, there's talk about 115 branches have been identified for either sale or closure. The high street being a lifeline. There's mention in some of them about hundreds of employees. There's a presence of post offices as banks close on high streets, so people really kind of need them to provide those banking services that banks are no longer high street banks are no longer on the high street in order to be able to do. Passport applications, driving license renewals, foreign currency exchanges, bill payments, etc., and the needs for local businesses to do their banking. Couple of the motions more specifically talk about Cosham, and one of them kind of talks about Cosham being a busy community hub and important for older residents not using online services. So that's kind of the broad brush of what everybody's saying is, hey, these things are really important, and they're used by these. But the Hunt Adair motion asks for the following actions: to write a letter to the Secretary of State and Minister for Post Offices from the leader of the council citing concerns, and that Portsmouth City Council supports petitions across the city to save post offices, and send both MPs a letter asking them to support Portsmouth City Council's campaign in this regard. Now, bearing in mind that it was actually one of the Labour MPs that launched their petition first to actually basically have a campaign about saving the post offices, and I think that was Amanda Martin's campaign in Portsmouth North. It kind of seems a strange thing to ask the Labour MPs to support a thing they've already launched a campaign on, but I'm sure they won't disagree.
Yeah.
So that was strike one.
That was A.
That was A. Strike two, if you like, is from our friends in PIP. So Derek North of Cosham fame and George Madrick. And the actions that they're calling for: write to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade and relevant junior ministers expressing concern. The Chief Executive of Portsmouth City Council to write to Post Office Chair Nigel Railton to express the city's concerns and request a meeting to discuss. And for the administration to gather information on how residents will be signposted and supported in vital services that may be lost. And then C, so next off the blocks was Team Blue. So from Spencer Gardner and Simon Bosher of Drayton and Farlington fame. Their actions: council firmly opposes any closure of Cosham Post Office and the inconvenience to local people, putting essential services out of reach. The Chief Executive of Portsmouth City Council write to the CEO of Post Offices Limited, setting out Portsmouth City Council's opposition and assurance that it won't shut. And the Chief Executive writes to Jonathan Reynolds, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, to request government immediately intervene. You sensing a theme?
No, I'm good with this.
Poised like a coiled zebra. And then
is it Labour?
And then last but not least was Team Labour with councillors Shah and Vallely, Saraskar Shah and Mary Vallely from Cosham fame. And their motion notes the petition from Amanda Martin was the first petition on the scene. I believe the Lib Dems launched a petition a couple of weeks after Amanda's had got hers off and running. So it kind of seems like let's all campaign for the same thing but do it slightly differently. Their actions were for Portsmouth City Council to support the campaign and for the administration to help by providing new operators either as partners or independent operators, and for the group leaders to write to the chair of the post office to express concern. So essentially, ironically, for something about post offices, lots of people are going to be buying lots of stamps.
Well, and it does seem like there is almost a single-handed, a mob-handed campaign to save the post offices by sending so many letters.
That's very meta.
that they turn a profit. Well, isn't this a strange one? To be honest, Simon, because Post Office Counters Limited or whatever various guise it exists in is the people that run the post offices, the buildings and the shops and that kind of thing are a private business. And the data that I could only find the 22-23 data online when I had a look this afternoon. And they lost £76 million. And half of the physical post offices lost money. So there is an element of and this is almost a rerun of the banking argument, isn't it? We demand that the banks, who are private companies with shareholders who are in this to make a profit, continue to run non-profit making ventures. Yeah, I don't think this is going to fly, is it? Despite the universal goodness of it all from all colours of our own political rainbow.
So I think there's certainly a model that works for post offices or for post office counters. The question is, and I don't understand it, if I'm honest, kind of how much of it is kind of separated out by which organisations. But if I'm honest, the post office that I use the most is the one that's inside the local McColl's at the end of Chatsworth Avenue.
Yeah, so it's a counter, isn't it?
But it doesn't need a person dedicated to just dealing with post office stuff standing there all day, does it? It's just and it's quite busy because it gets kind of frequent use. But I'm just trying to understand, when you think of how many things that post offices used to be the only place you could go to get done, how many of those things they aren't anymore, and the amount of the considering how many fewer people will they be serving that can't either self-serve online or could just go to a local post office counter that's at their nearest convenience store. Other convenience stores are available. I don't know.
And this is where I really struggle with the and it's very similar to banks. If I look at kind of, I get it in terms of, if you are a shopkeeper that still takes cash, you want to go and bank that. You want to go and put it somewhere at the end of days trading. I guess no, I've got nothing else for banks. So I've got nothing else.
Yeah,
and well, some people like to use cash. Well, that's okay, but that is a lifestyle choice that a private business is not obliged to support. And similarly with, I hear passport applications and driving license applications, and yes, they can be done online. And if you can't, for whatever reason, access them online, it's not something you've got to do every Tuesday lunchtime, is it? So you are going to have to go and it's not every post office that's going to close. It's two that are, obviously they wouldn't be getting rid of them if they were making a nice healthy profit. So there is this element of,
Mm.
well, I don't want to see another empty shop on the high street, and I don't want to see people who are working there lose their jobs. But the only real option is if somebody wants to take them on in a sort of franchise model and do other things from that building, which is going to generate an income that makes it sustainable.
Yeah, I think I think like a lot of things, it will. And I get it. I get Cosham having a presence on the high street. I get the one in Slindon Street being kind of needed if there's nowhere else that can do the things that you go to for, the services that you can't get somewhere else there. But you can get those services somewhere else by, if those can be done by arrangement, right? So in Cosham High Street, for example, okay, if the post office counter on its own isn't generating enough footfall and turnover that it can't pay the rent for a shop, then will it end up like pharmacies ended up to being either kind of subsumed within supermarkets, for example, and that's not great for the high street unless it goes into Tesco or goes into somewhere like WH Smith's, which I must admit I can't understand how it's still open. But lots of these things, they're not used as much as they used to, and although there is still a need for them, we don't necessarily need a shop that only deals with the things that entity deals with in order to be able to satisfy those needs of, and quite rightly so, those people that want to deal with cash or need to deal with cash, and those people that don't want to or can't access services online. There are other ways to provide those services without you renting an entire shop space to do it.
And I think that, and perhaps that's looking at this through a different angle, which is that it's about service provision.
Mm.
And I guess it is this balance between what is statutory service provision
Yeah.
and what is, what is a competitive business. And if I look at the model of the post office, there is an element of, there are certain things, like driving license, passport applications, that the post office works on behalf of the government as a conduit for you to be able to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
But the model for those services, are not that there's one in every high street. If you look at something like, well, I can't remember what the job centre's called now, but I think there are two in the whole of Portsmouth. There's one in Cosham and there's one in um, down near town. It is that element of the model of there being six or seven of them scattered across town. It is an outmoded one, and I think this is where I think for the people for whom the post office, there will be I think there'll be a wistfulness. So the campaign, I think people will sign and say, oh, yeah, we need the post office. And it's that question. It's the Woolworths question, isn't it? Oh, Woolies. Oh, I loved Woolies. When did you last shop in there? Well, I bought some pick and mix about 8 years ago. Right. Well, that's not going to sustain the business model, is it? Your £2.85, which you thought was a bit steep and swore you'd never buy them again, wasn't enough to sustain Woolies. And similarly, and maybe I'm being a bit parochial here, Simon. I have not been in a post office in 30 years, and we post a fair amount of packages from the house, but we don't take them to a post office. We either get them collected or we press the button online that prints out the label and somebody comes and gets it, or we use another parcel courier and drop it off at one of the newsagents in the high streets. And I I think this feels like an emotional campaign, and I'm not sure that the Secretary of State or the business is really going to worry about Cosham or Slindon Street. Or even if they do care deeply, I don't know what they can do to an independent business to say, "Oi, you've got to keep losing money in those shops because the people of Portsmouth are not happy about it."
Yeah, I completely get it with the kind of arguments of it does seem a bit strange that on one hand people will quite happily take to social media complaining about the loss of a particular business or a particular service, but if you don't use it all year round, then that's what happens because local businesses, large or small, and especially the small ones, can't survive on just what you spend on them on off chance once a year. They need your support all the way through the year, and I think this is just part of the change of the reinvention of the high street. And when you look at things like libraries, you look at things like pharmacies, you look at things like post offices, and some things are a business, some of those things are a private business, and some of those things have a social and a community need.
Mm.
But there's ways to kind of co-locate those things so that you generate the footfall that actually makes it worth doing that in a lively way. I don't, if I'm honest, I don't know that that's something that government should heavily get involved in, other than making it easier for local councils to make the right decisions for their residents as to how they can attract the right sorts of entities and organisations to operate in that sort of way, so that rather than for different business entities that are struggling in the 21st century because half of their customer base that they would have had in the 20th century doesn't use them in that way anymore, that they can combine forces, if you like, and locate on the same site. That's kind of the thing for me. But there's the cynic in me that politicians will always, it's an easy thing to campaign on because people will be easy to be annoyed about it or be shocked and surprised and dismayed about it, but probably can't remember the last time they used it.
Yeah. And I think on this one, what we're going to see is universal
Yeah,
agreement
of
and
course.
a bit of letter writing. So that will generate a bit of business.
I'll keep the post
Um,
office going.
well, probably won't actually, will it? Because every business will, as and something the size of Portsmouth will have a franking machine, and it'll all be done splendidly. And yes, I'm sure we'll see universal agreement on this one. And but unfortunately, I can't see it making an iota of difference.
Okay. Well, that was the that was the big tamale.
Well,
The
that's four killed off.
Yeah.
Right. What comes after that?
So the next thing in the list, once you kind of take out all of the post office shenanigans, all of the different varieties of post office shock, breakfast clubs. Not the one with Judd Nelson and Molly Ringwald. We're
No.
showing our age, but so this one from Councillor Tom Coles and Mary Vallely of Team Red. This one talks about on the 27th of November, the government urged schools to sign up for a free breakfast club rollout. Talks a lot about how providing breakfast clubs helps families tackle hunger, improve school attendance, and alleviate pressure on household budgets. And there's an early adopter scheme for 750 schools to basically be in the early adopter rollout. So essentially, the trial rollout to kind of help deliver it. Talks about the government being committed to introducing free breakfast clubs in every primary school in England to tackle childhood hunger and attendance, and calls on the actions for the cabinet member for children, families and education to write to primary schools across the city and encourage them to take it up, and for corporate communications to promote breakfast clubs and how to access them, and for the leader of the council to write to the Secretary of State for Education to welcome the rollout and to ask that Portsmouth City Council is involved to shape the future of government national breakfast club policy. Has everyone had their Weetabix? Doesn't say that, that's just me.
Mm. And I hate to be this cynical this close to Christmas.
No, Ian.
No, it's not like me. But unfortunately, isn't this motion is haven't Labour done a terribly good thing with the introduction of the Breakfast Club? Can we just talk about how good Labour have been introducing breakfast clubs? And it's such a good thing that we should be supporting it and doing it because it's a good thing. Look at this good thing. Who was it done by? Was it the Conservatives? No, 14 years of. Oh, it was us. Labour have done a good thing. Breakfast clubs, good thing. Um, this is another one of those motions, and it's not. I know I'm picking on Labour on this one, but we've seen them all year, which is it is a pointless, empty motion that we call upon the council to tell schools who know their business, their I don't mean that in a financial sense. They will know what the breakfast club offering is. They will have analysed it. It's a free breakfast club, you know, without seeing the details. If it is free, and I'm putting that in air quotes, such that a school could put it on at no financial cost or disadvantage to themselves, there's an element of why wouldn't they? But I do wonder, this motion baffles me, Simon.
Is this one that we'd put firmly in the pile of this could have just been a letter to the cabinet member for children, families and education rather than a council motion?
Well, it could have been a motion. It could have been a letter to that person. It could have been a letter from the the offices of our two Labour MPs who will know all of the primary schools in Portsmouth saying this is a wonderful thing, please take advantage of it. It could have been a letter from the Labour offices and the Labour team to all of the primary schools. You know, writing to the Minister for Education to tell them that they've done a good thing. Uh, as I say, I'm lost on this one. Um, breakfast clubs, good thing, I'm sure. Um, I wish when my children were small, somebody else would have fed them in the morning, and then I wouldn't have had to pay for it. Interesting that it's a universal benefit, so your primary school age child will now get their breakfast paid for by the taxpayer rather than you having to pay for it yourself. Um, if that's considered to be a good thing, then that's a good thing. But we're not debating whether the breakfast clubs are a good or bad thing. They're here. So why not use them?
Well, I think previous governments have shown that you can improve school attendance and attainment by making sure that children are fed. You can help parents get to work and have flexibility, basically have the flexibility needed to make sure that their working options are open to them by essentially extending the operating hours of the school, so that because childcare is expensive and difficult to secure. So I don't think the policy in itself is really kind of in any question or any doubt. It seems like eminently a good idea and common sense. I think it sounds like the thing that we're kind of interpreting quite cynically is having seen lots of motions that are calling on a thing for a thing that is a
Yeah,
thing. And
yeah.
you'll see another one later on. Our favourite of the Lib Dem administration calling on itself to do a thing.
Well,
But aren't we? I mean, we are lucky, of course, that one of the city's MPs is the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Early Education.
absolutely, and I guess and the bit for me, if I'm being playful about the flipping that on its head, yes, it's a good thing. Yes, it increases attainment. Yes, it extends the working day. I thought it was a jolly good idea if a pensioner's income is only £12,000 a year to give them an extra few £100s to keep them warm. I thought that was a pretty good investment, if I'm honest. But I'm told if somebody is as lavish as having £12,000 a year income, they don't need the £300 a year. So I'm a bit baffled if my income is you know the household income is £500,000 a year, but for reasons I send my children to state school, that another taxpayer pays for their breakfast. But that's more of an ideological point. So, yes, in this case, we're calling on the I would expect this one. It's a difficult one because if there was an election next year, it would be this one is a go on, I dare you to say that we shouldn't be
Yeah,
supporting
this is leaflet writing, but there won't be any
the
leaflets.
no, the tiny tots getting a free breakfast and you voted against it. So I think we've said it all. What comes next?
So, so next on our agenda is the notice of motion from Team Pip, and that one talks about that thorny subject of HMOs. But this one talks about unregistered HMOs in council stock. So this is from Russell Simpson and George Madgwick, from Hilsey and Paulsgrove, respectively. It talks about the viewers might remember the episodes that we've done. We've looked at kind of HMOs a couple of times and got into the nitty gritty, and I won't go into the nitty gritty of it, but the headline of it is I don't know if you can recall, when the council receives an application for an HMO, they do an assessment as to whether the total number of residential properties in a 50-metre radius of the application, whether this application will take them over 10% or whether there's more than 10% already. And if it will, then basically they will refuse it. There are other things about it being right next door to another HMO or two HMO, or creating a situation where two HMOs sandwich a non-HMO. But essentially this one throws up a question around, there's actually a large number of homes that it claims are owned by Portsmouth City Council, and Portsmouth City Council itself as a landlord and landowner isn't obliged to apply for HMO license, and therefore is essentially operating HMOs that aren't registered as HMOs, is what this motion is saying. Now, I did approach Russell Simpson to ask him whether he would. I'd offered him a chance to record some comments about the motion, and indeed I spoke to Darren Sanders, the cabinet member for housing on the Lib Dem administration, whether either of them would like to contribute, and whether Darren had anything to say about whether the assertion in this motion is accurate or not. Russell wanted to keep his powder dry for Tuesday, completely understand, and so did Darren. Yep. So we're just going to have to watch and wait and see what the response is as to whether that's really a thing or not, whether there's some sort of technicality that says that that's not the case. But it kind of keeps speaking to this thing of, you remember last time when we spoke about it, it had been something like 9 to 18 months since the register had actually been updated.
Yes, indeed.
I looked at it today and it hasn't been updated since April.
And I think this, and you know, forgive our cynicism with the earlier arrangements, or forgive my cynicism, but on this one for me is a really important point. And again, the mechanism by which this density of HMOs is assessed, it does beg some questions, doesn't it? Because I think we've talked about it before. We've looked at the numbers which show just how massively lucrative, you know, if you're a property developer and you own an HMO, it is a money printing machine. So I do wonder, you know, I think we've all wondered how many unofficial HMOs fly below the radar. You know, if Portsmouth City Council itself doesn't have to declare its own HMOs as HMOs, then it would suggest that the problem might be worse than people think it is, and they think it's pretty bad now. And I think, you know, if we're going to be fair and balanced, which is our way, the fact that, you know, the administration has bought a number of properties back into the ownership of PCC, you know, that seems to work quite well. The more they do this, the more stock they will have on their books, and the more they you know, this could be a thing. So I think at that point I'm going to have to press a pause, because obviously Russell and Darren are both approaching the chamber on Tuesday, with one's coming into Eye of the Tiger and the other one's coming into the march from Star Wars, and we'll see what happens. Will the sparks fly again?
Who could tell? But the motion is calling for PCC to review the properties it currently exempts from the HMO list. and in the several areas where PCC properties included in the numbers basically report what areas are actually approaching the 10% threshold and what areas have actually now passed it with those things. So this is one of those kind of really nerdy points, motions, which is probably why we get possibly a bit more interested in it than lots of other people do. But it's that interesting thing of the policy and the numbers, and how you count the numbers makes a difference. So
Yeah.
that's
See,
the interesting thing, I think.
I don't think this is a nerdy one, Simon. I think this one is the kind of thing that
Mm,
that your local council should be about. There are rules around HMOs,
hmm.
and for me, that's about the quality of life that people experience
Yeah.
if they have HMOs in their community. And the council has drawn lines and said if it goes above this, that would be bad, and it wouldn't be good for people. So in that case, it is really important that those rules are respected. And if there are loopholes and things, which means that people are more HMO'd than the rules say they should be, then for me, dragging that out into the open is something really important. So this one gets this is the first one that gets the thumbs up. This is worth discussing.
Okay. So interesting thing then to go to. So we shall watch that with keen eyes and see what Darren's response is to it, and how the motion goes. There weren't any amendments that I could see actually on the agenda on the website. So if there are any coming for any of the motions, then we've not seen them yet. So next up, so we've done our HMOs, we've done our post offices. National insurance rises. So this is 10G. This is the last notice of motion that we've got before we get into the members' questions. That exciting and murky 40-minute list of questions. So this one is from Leader of the Council, Councillor Steve Pitt, and from Darren Sanders, both from the Lib Dem administration. Talks about the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, stating that the changes in employers' national insurance threshold and increase in employers' national insurance contributions will impact the voluntary and community sector, or VCSE, to the tune of £1.4 billion in the next financial year. Those organisations have sought to seek assistance from the government, but the government assessment is that around half of charities will not be any worse off due to the increase in employers' allowance of £10,500. I guess you could also say that means that half of them will be worse off. Although the Guardian reports that this indicates that this will only help employers with up to 4 full-time employees, and that all businesses with greater than 4 full-time employees will end up passing those costs on to councils. And these are important organisations that local councils rely on to help them deliver services. The Nuffield Trust estimates the increased cost to councils from their suppliers and partner organisations due to national insurance changes will be around £900 million, outstripping the £600 million of new money allocated by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, yeah, many services the councils rely on, and the risk that this could be pushing many of them towards insolvency and irreparably damaging the sector. One local charity, the motion notes, has informed the council that it calculates that its bill would increase by £400,000 in following the budget. And the motion calls on. So this is a motion that was proposed by Councillor Steve Pitt and Darren Sanders, and the action for the motion is for the Portsmouth City Council calls on the Chancellor Exchequer to do more to support small businesses, care providers, and the VCSE, and look elsewhere for the black hole, and asking for the Leader of the Council to write to her to this effect.
Yes. So this is and this is an area where I've got a little bit of knowledge, which is that the £400,000 is a baffling figure. The local charity, and I'll
Hmm.
come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, uh, many people will know I work in the charity sector, and I know that the vast majority of charities, particularly smaller ones, went back to Rachel Reeves and they got together with their representative groups and went back and said, "Really? You're going to come after us? Is there no exemptions?" Because obviously this rise applies to, you know, frontline services. So it'll, it's that piece where it's going to hit everybody. And, I sat down with my piece of paper, and looked at it. And effectively, if you've got more than 4 employees, then when you look at somebody who is currently on minimum wage, you would get 9 and a bit grand exemption from national insurance. That drops to 5 grand. So immediately April the 1st, that employee is going to cost you £600 more a year due to that change. Then you get the 1.2%. So again, between 5,000 and the national living wage will be 24. So there's 19,000. So that's another 200 quid. So in broad terms, if somebody's earning minimum wage, every employee is going to cost their employer about another £800 a year. Now, you don't have to be a very big employer at all, 10, 15, when suddenly that money is not only, when you look at the rise, the 7% rise in the living wage, that's half a person. And that will be half a person either that they're not going to employ, or they're going to have to downsize, or they're going to have to, in the case of charities, raise more money to cover. Um, and all of that for me is a terrible thing. But Labour and the Chancellor have been very clear about that is the way that they want to raise additional income. And because that's the case, I'm not sure that a strongly worded letter from Steve Pitt, the chief executive, and anyone else is going to soften the cold, stone, bony heart of Rachel Reeves. She's set out her she's set her stall out.
I I mean, I agree. I don't think the letter is gonna kind of make any difference. I think this is just it's a key thing, and I think it's a theme that we're seeing kind of develop over the last couple of full councils since the general election, where I think initially Labour seemed to be surprised that the council or other or opposition or sorry, admit parties that were other than than Labour would be suggesting that some of the things that they've done that they don't agree with, and they seemed, I think, initially to be surprised by that. I think they've now kind of got past that initial surprise, and I think that's maybe where the thing about the breakfast clubs come from is them
Yes.
trying to on the full council agenda balance the narrative of basically, rather than you hear about, oh, aren't Labour doing a rubbish job, actually here's a thing that Labour are doing really well at. And other political parties aren't really going to sit there and celebrate what the Labour government are doing. I think they'll be waiting a long time for that to happen. But I think it's just an interesting kind of development, and I think it's an interesting kind of political point to be making in a year where Portsmouth doesn't have elections, and there isn't a general election for 4.5 years. So yeah.
Yeah, this is the thing, and we've covered these all year. For me, we've just run through the full agenda, and if I look at it, there is actually only one item on the agenda that PCC has control over and can potentially do anything about.
And that was the letting
That
primary
was the
schools know about the breakfast start.
No,
Breakfast club.
that's the HMO.
All right. Okay.
You can write to primary schools, but you've got no, for each school and each head and the board of governors have got to make a decision as to whether early adoption is right for them.
Yeah.
BCC can't make them.
No, and especially not the ones that are academies, because they don't have as much kind of headline control of. So it's a mixed bag. Shall we have a quick look at the questions?
Yeah, I would say it's not a mixed bag. I would say, unfortunately, it's a similar bag to what we've seen most of the council meetings, which is it's posturing and theatre, and very little substance. So yeah, grumpy. Let's see whether we've got about less than 10 minutes left, so let's try and whip through the questions, see whether there's anything of any merit in there.
You're getting a loads of fireworks outside.
Yes, I am, and
Yeah.
I have no idea why, because it's early December. It's not fireworks night. It's not Halloween. It's just a load of frightened pets, and so
Yes.
well done to whoever's.
So our apologies to our listeners if that's coming across in the stream. So question 1 from Spencer Gardner to the Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care, Councillor Matthew Winnington. Basically, after Labour's failure to exempt primary care providers from the national insurance increase laid out in the autumn budget, services that support some of the most vulnerable residents have warned that this will lead to cuts and closures. What is the anticipated impact on pharmacies, GPs, care homes and hospices in the city? It's kind of like this.
No.
Did you want to piggyback onto 10G? Is that kind of feels like that's the...
Yeah, well, it does, and I guess it's fair to ask.
Mm-hmm.
It's fair to ask, what's the impact? Now, I guess there's that element of in those things. I don't think all of those places report to Mr. Winnington, despite his power and fame. So I guess it's a fair question to ask. I don't know whether it's the council will only know those things as those various organisations disclose to the council. I guess you can ask them, but it'll be
don't know that it's going to
people
provide...
doing their budgets about now for next April and sharpening their pencils and having a miserable old time of it, with more bills to pay.
So question 2 from Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson, CBE, to the Cabinet Member for Transport, Peter Candlish. Across the city, the energy, water and telecoms companies seem to be digging up many roads. No doubt this is because there has been underinvestment in repair of utilities for many years by the privatised companies. If it costs these companies more to close our roads, or maybe they will get the work done quicker, what work is being done to introduce lane rental on our main roads so there is a real cost to these companies to doing roadworks slowly? I wonder whether there might be some inside knowledge on that, because wasn't GVJ previously the Cabinet Member for Transport?
I think he was. So
we'll see what the answer is to that one. Question 3, there are only 4, so don't worry. So from Cal Corkery in Charles Dickens, to the chair of the Twinning Advisory Group, he's asking for progress on an update on progress of requesting a twinning arrangement with a Palestinian municipality.
And I would suggest the people who are living in that part of the world might probably have a bit more on their agenda at the moment than a twinning arrangement with Portsmouth, perhaps, but still.
Possibly. Question 4 from Councillor Benedict Swan of Copner, to the Leader of the Council with portfolio responsibility for culture, regeneration and economic development, Councillor Steve Pitt. Could the Leader give an update on efforts to allow local producers to display and sell their products at the International Ferry Port Terminal? So we'll have a bit of local producer support, as we did in a previous episode.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to hear what the answer is to that one.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad idea, is it? If you're coming to Portsmouth, then
But especially with the cruise ships that we've got docking these days, it would be great for them to be able to see what Portsmouth has to offer, its retail offer. Oh God, I sound like a PR person. I'm going to go
no,
sit in a
it's
quiet room.
if they're coming here, we'd like to have something to wow them with, wouldn't we? So
Indeed. So
yeah.
so that was the 4 questions. So thankfully, much less than the 16 that it was the meeting before last.
So it'll be an interesting one because I think it's one that I think we're going to scoot through,
Mhm.
hopefully. And to be fair, people will have to do their own homework, Simon, because this is our last show of 2022. We will be back in the new year,
Mhm.
and I think our first show back will just be just before the Donald is inaugurated.
Or on the day Donald is inaugurated.
On the day that Donald is
Yeah.
inaugurated.
So so it looks like that our US politics expert Lee Sartain will be joining us on the day of the inauguration. We'll do a rescheduled show to actually be on the day. So it'll be hot off the press because with the time difference, inauguration's at midday, and with the time difference, if we go live around our normal time just before 6:30, then we'll be hot off the press with an impression on it. So it'll be really great to see what Lee's got to say.
Exactly. And we will, whilst we'll be off for a few weeks, we won't be resting on our laurels. We will be pulling together our winter into spring schedule, which we are frantically working on. And one of the things we do throw out there is that we do requests. So if there is a subject that burns within you and you'd like to see us cover on the podcast, then never be shy about contacting the podcast through all the usual means, and we're always happy to chat, and we will pull a show together around any good idea. Brackets, there are a few ideas that we won't pull a show together. That's my disclaimer at the end of that one.
And we're not even averse to exploring things that don't seem like a good idea. So we'll reveal more about our winter spring schedule, and also with there being no local elections in Portsmouth in 2025, we will see if there's an interest in doing some Hampshire County Council ward hustings for any of the parts, any of our local neighbours. So Fareham, Gosport, Havant, see whether they're interested in doing any of that. So there's lots for us to be working on, and I'll still keep an eye on what happens on Tuesday and probably put some stuff on social media. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Perfect. Well, you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. Thank you for being with us all year. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury. Please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, comment, etc., etc. Give us a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you very much for following us in 2024, and we'll see you in 2025. And you and your family and loved ones have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.